Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Audrey Ember. I make videos documenting my creative journey and sort of sharing as I learn. I mostly focus on cinematography and filmmaking and all of that good stuff. So if you're interested, make sure you click that subscribe button. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, but I've sort of been waiting a little bit to make sure that I actually know what I'm talking about. So I only really started getting into like cinematography and filmmaking towards the beginning of this year. I got my first DSLR, which is the Canon Rebel SL2. I'm shooting on it right now. I got it at the end of last year. I'm still pretty new to this, but I kind of wanted to share what I've learned over these past like 7 or 8 months now. If you're starting YouTube or filmmaking or whatever and you just want to know the basics and the things that I wish I had been told when I just got started, this video is for you, so you should keep watching. Because wow, if someone had told me this stuff when I just got started, my mind would have been blown. It would have helped me progress a lot faster, I think. So I hope this can help some of you out who are just beginning. The first important thing you should know is the type of camera that you're using. So there are point and shoots, like this one is my Canon G7X Mark II. I've used this for so long now. I've dropped it in a cake before. That was fun. I think there's still like some cake crusties in here. There is, that's so gross. Point and shoots are great, and honestly, a lot of the time it's a cheaper option. It depends on what you want to do. If you're more into like cinematography and you want a more professional look, or you just want more control over your camera, then a DSLR is probably the way to go. But you can get so much done with a point and shoot as well. It really depends on the type of content you're making. I will probably make a whole other video on, you know, is it worth investing in a DSLR or point and shoot, and a bunch of other like budget gear options. So keep an eye out for that video because it's definitely coming. Just knowing your type of equipment. So point and shoots, you can't change the lens, obviously. There are a bunch of like basic functionalities and things you can change, but if you want something that you can actually control, then a DSLR might be the option for you. Now, the big thing that took me forever to understand, because, okay, I was in film school for 1 year, and I took a filmmaking foundations class, and I had no idea. Like, when they explained it in class, I was just confused. And these are the things that you just really need to understand the concepts of so that you can move forward in your photography, filmmaking, video production, like whatever. These are 3 things you should probably understand because they will make your life a lot easier and you'll actually know what's going on. So it's pretty important. It's ISO, aperture, and your shutter speed. Normally they're shown in like a nice triangle because they all sort of impact each other, if that makes sense. I'm gonna try and explain this as easily as possible. While I'm shooting this video, I highly encourage you to pick up your camera and sort of just look for what I'm talking about. So right now when I'm talking about aperture, I want you to find on your camera where your aperture is listed. So for me, I'm using a Canon camera. I feel like all Canon cameras probably use the same screen system, so it should be very similar. Aperture is shown like f point something, okay? So it's gonna be like 1.8 or 2.8 or 4.5 or whatever. On your camera, that's your aperture. The larger the actual like hole of the camera, the more light's gonna be let in, obviously. The smaller the opening, less light's gonna get in. And it's shown by the smaller the number of the aperture, so like 1.8 is a very small number, and that shows the maximum aperture. So yes, the smaller the number, the bigger the opening of your lens. My camera is currently shooting at 4.5, so that is going to be a much smaller aperture, which is a higher number, but it means that the hole is smaller. It's kind of confusing. Just try and wrap your head around that, digest it, and then we can move on. Along with aperture, normally the lower aperture you have, so the wider the opening, the more light's gonna be let into your camera, and what that's gonna do is, obviously it's gonna impact your exposure, but also why people like cameras that can go to lower apertures is because that helps with the depth of field. If you're holding your camera right now, I highly encourage you to just play around with changing your aperture and see how that impacts your depth of field. So lower aperture means that the background's gonna be more blurry. So that's why people invest in lenses that have really low apertures, because they want, you know, the shallow depth of field. That's very cinematic. It's what a lot of filmmakers want. Next is shutter speed. Now, shutter speed obviously is how, I don't know how to show, it's like how fast the lens opens and closes when you're filming. If you're taking pictures of sports, you're gonna want a faster shutter speed so that, you know, it lets in less light so that the picture is taken more quickly, which means the person you're taking a picture of, since they're moving around a lot, you need to take the picture fast so that you can pause their movement with the least amount of blur possible. If you leave the shutter open for longer, they're gonna get more of their movement while it's open, capturing the image. Your picture's probably gonna be a lot blurrier. I'm gonna talk more about shutter speeds later and what that has to do with FPS, frames per second, but for now let me briefly touch on ISO, which is the last thing of that triangle. ISO is sort of like adding light into your picture. It's kind of digitally putting in more light so you can actually see what's going on in your image. The downside of ISO is that the higher the number, the more grain or the more noise your image is going to have. So noise looks like this. Here's an example. I'm currently editing this video. How's this sound going? But I just wanted to show you what ISO looks like because literally anywhere is a prime example of this. You see that like weird static looking thing? That's great. No one wants that, okay? I'm using Photo Booth right now. It's pretty terrible, but here's an example. How are you liking the video so far? I think it's pretty good. I've been editing it for a couple hours now, so this is kind of confusing. I'm commenting with you on my own video. I'm starting to blow my own mind. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna go. Bye. It's basically not nice. Like, you don't want grain, it doesn't look nice, and it's hard to take out in post. So you kind of have to balance those three things. They all impact each other in different ways, you know? So I highly encourage you to put your camera into manual mode, to just fiddle around with the shutter speed, the aperture, try getting that shallow depth of field, see what works with your camera. It's honestly a lot more productive than just listening to someone like me talking about it for however long you're sitting in a classroom, because you're never gonna get a real feel for it until you actually try it out for yourself. Next is frames per second, FPS. That's very important when you're starting to use a camera, especially when it comes to video, which is what I do mostly. Normally cameras will have like 24 FPS, 30, and then 60, and if it's a good camera, 120 or sometimes higher, I don't know. 24 frames per second is the traditional cinematic look. Okay, so when you're just normally filming, shooting your videos, I recommend using 24 frames per second because it'll give you that motion blur that people associate with this traditional cinematic look. It's kind of what everyone's going for. And then 60 frames per second is used for more slow-mo. So if you want to shoot some B-roll, for example, if your camera can do 60 or even 120, which is even better, put it to that frame rate so that you can capture more images per second, so it just looks nicer. But then you need to convert it to 24 in post to slow it down. I'm gonna make a whole other video on like cinematography 101 if you guys are interested in that, so I don't want to go too much in depth on that right now. To truly like achieve the cinematic look, you also need to make sure that your shutter speed is double your frame rate. For example, if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set to 1/48, or on my camera it says 50, which is the closest one to 48 that my camera has, so just put it to that. So just double whatever your frame rate is. So if I was shooting in 60, I would set my camera to 120, but my camera doesn't have that. The closest is 125, so I'll just use that instead. It's kind of like if your camera's just taking the pictures, the shutter speed is what impacts the motion blur. So if you want to make sure you achieve the correct cinematic look, you need to make sure that your shutter speed is double your frame rate. And if this isn't making sense, again, I highly encourage you to just fiddle around with your camera and watch your screen and see the difference between, you know, that cinematic blurry look that you're kind of going for versus the more crispy home video look of just plain 60 frames per second without the doubled shutter speed. This took me so long to understand. I'm so proud of myself right now for being able to say that. I've like understood this in my head, but I haven't been actually able to fully digest it for a long time. And it really wasn't until Peter called me out in his B-roll reaction video that I was like, okay, I need to figure out what the hell I'm doing because I can't keep making these mistakes.
My recommendation too is I don't think that was shot in 24 frames a second. It looked kind of like it was in 30 or 60.
So after that, I've really been trying to figure it out. And literally last week, I made the same mistake. People were calling it out in my video and I was watching it back and like, highly recommend you really sit on this information, test it out on your own camera, watch a ton of other videos about it, and really just make sure you get it. Another thing you need to understand about your camera is white balance. So on a lot of digital cameras like the one I have, literally just go into the settings of your camera and either put it on auto, or if you want to be fancy, you can choose the settings yourself, or if your camera's messing up and you want a certain look, you can literally change the white balance for yourself. And the reason why you need to change the white balance is because natural light versus like indoor lights, like tungsten lights, have this sort of warm glow while natural light is cooler. If you're shooting indoors and you don't want to look yellow, it's because your white balance is off and you need to change it for tungsten lights, for example. And if you're shooting outside and maybe you look very blue, you need to reset your white balance so that your camera adjusts to the natural light. Try to experiment with your lens a lot. That's like the most important thing, to really learn your equipment and do a lot of research. Don't procrastinate on learning your stuff because you'll thank yourself later when you're put in a situation where you should probably know what you're talking about. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this was helpful to some of you who may just be starting out when it comes to using cameras. If you're confused about like the frame rate thing I was talking about earlier, I'm gonna make another video more specific about that. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up because it lets me know you liked it. Help each other out in the comments of this video. If anyone has questions or if I messed up, please call me out on it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I will see you this weekend with another new video. Bye!